The story that made millions of Americans fear a single ingredient did not begin in a laboratory, or a government agency, or even inside a food company. It began with a short letter. In 1968, a physician named Robert Ho Man Kwok sent a brief note to one of the most respected medical journals in the world, the New England Journal of Medicine. The letter was not long. It wasn't presented as groundbreaking research or a scientific discovery. It was simply a personal observation. Dr. Kwok wrote that every time he ate at Chinese restaurants in the United States, he noticed a strange sensation afterward. He described feeling numbness in the back of his neck, weakness in his arms, and sometimes a strange pressure in his chest. He wondered what might be causing it. In the letter, he suggested several possibilities. Maybe it was the cooking wine used in Chinese dishes. Maybe it was the high amount of salt in the food. Or perhaps it was something called monosodium glutamate, a flavor enhancer commonly used in Chinese cooking. At the time, monosodium glutamate, usually called MSG, was already widely used around the world. It had been part of cooking for decades, particularly in Asian cuisines. But the letter introduced a new and memorable phrase: Chinese restaurant syndrome. It sounded medical, it sounded scientific, and it spread quickly. Soon newspapers began discussing the mysterious symptoms described in the letter. Magazine articles warned readers about possible reactions after eating Chinese food. Television programs mentioned the strange-sounding condition. Within a few years, millions of Americans had heard the story. Many people began to believe that something hidden inside Chinese food might be making them sick. Restaurants started posting signs in their windows claiming no MSG. Food companies began advertising products that were MSG-free, and a simple ingredient that had once been almost unknown to most Americans suddenly became the center of a national food scare. But here is the strange part of the story. The fear that spread across the United States did not begin with strong scientific evidence. It began with a question, a short letter from a doctor who wondered what he had eaten. And that question would eventually turn a common cooking ingredient into one of the most misunderstood substances in modern food history. Long before the controversy in American restaurants, the story of MSG had already begun thousands of miles away, in Japan. In the early 20th century, a Japanese chemist named Kikune Ikeda was studying something that had puzzled cooks for generations. There were 4 basic tastes everyone already knew: sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. But Ikeda believed there was another one. While eating a traditional Japanese soup made from seaweed broth called kombu, he noticed a deep, savory flavor that did not fit into any of the 4 known taste categories. It wasn't sweet, and it wasn't salty in the usual sense. It was something richer, something that seemed to make food taste fuller and more satisfying. Ikeda decided to investigate it scientifically. In 1908, after studying the chemical composition of the kombu broth, he identified the compound responsible for that distinctive taste. It was glutamic acid, a naturally occurring amino acid found in many foods. Tomatoes contained it, cheese contained it, mushrooms contained it. Even the human body naturally produced glutamate. Ikeda realized that if this compound could be isolated and used in cooking, it could enhance flavor in a remarkable way. He called this new taste umami, a Japanese word often translated as pleasant, savory taste. Soon after his discovery, Ikeda worked with a company to produce a crystallized form of glutamate that could be used as a seasoning. That substance was called monosodium glutamate. MSG, the product was marketed under the name Ajinomoto, which roughly means the essence of flavor. It quickly became popular in Japan and other parts of Asia because it allowed cooks to intensify the natural taste of food. For decades, MSG was simply treated as another seasoning. Restaurants used it. Home cooks used it. Food companies used it in soups, sauces, and snacks. And outside of scientific circles, very few people even thought about it. By the middle of the 20th century, MSG had quietly spread across the world. But in the United States, most people had never heard its name. That would soon change. Because once the letter published in 1968 introduced the phrase Chinese restaurant syndrome, a simple seasoning suddenly became something much more controversial, and what had once been a quiet scientific discovery would soon be pulled into a much larger cultural story. After the letter from Dr. Robert Homan Kwok was published in the New England Journal of Medicine, something unexpected happened. The medical journal had originally printed the letter as part of a section where doctors sometimes shared observations, questions, or unusual experiences. It was not presented as a formal scientific study. It was simply one physician describing symptoms he believed might be connected to a meal. But once the phrase Chinese restaurant syndrome appeared in print, the idea began to travel far beyond the pages of the journal. Newspapers picked up the story. Magazine writers began repeating it. Television programs mentioned it when discussing strange health reactions related to food. And the phrase itself was memorable enough that people quickly started repeating it in everyday conversation. Soon the idea took on a life of its own. For many Americans in the late 1960s and early 1970s, Chinese restaurants were becoming increasingly popular. Cities across the country were seeing a rise in Chinese immigrant communities opening small family restaurants. These restaurants offered something new and exciting. The flavors were different from traditional American cooking. Dishes were often richer, more aromatic, and seasoned in unfamiliar ways. But unfamiliar foods can sometimes trigger suspicion. When people heard about Chinese restaurant syndrome, some began to connect ordinary sensations after eating with the story they had heard. A headache, a feeling of fullness, even simple tiredness after a large meal could suddenly be interpreted as a reaction to MSG, and because the idea was repeated in newspapers and television reports, it started to feel more credible. Restaurants began to notice the shift. Customers started asking questions. Some diners would even ask directly whether the food contained MSG within a few years. A new phrase started appearing in restaurant windows across the United States. No MSG. Food manufacturers followed the trend. Packages of snacks and sauces began advertising themselves as MSG-free, suggesting that the ingredient had become something people should avoid. Yet, at the same time, something strange was happening inside scientific research. Many studies attempting to reproduce the symptoms described in the original letter were struggling to find consistent results. When researchers conducted controlled experiments, most participants did not experience the dramatic reactions that the media stories had suggested. But by that point, the public narrative had already taken hold. The idea had become part of popular culture. And once a food fear becomes widely accepted, it can be very difficult to reverse. Because what spreads quickly in society is not always scientific certainty. Sometimes it is simply a powerful story. As the fear around MSG continued to spread across the United States, researchers began noticing something unusual. The panic seemed to focus almost entirely on one type of food: Chinese food. That detail raised questions for some scientists and historians, because MSG was not exclusive to Chinese cooking. In fact, glutamate naturally existed in many foods that Americans consumed every day. Tomatoes contained glutamate. Cheese contained it. Mushrooms, meat, and even certain vegetables naturally produced similar compounds. Food manufacturers in the United States had also been using MSG in processed foods for years. It appeared in soups, snacks, canned meals, and flavoring blends. Many people were already consuming small amounts of it regularly without realizing it. Yet the fear rarely focused on those products. Instead, it centered on Chinese restaurants. To some observers, the pattern suggested that something deeper might be happening. Chinese restaurants had long been part of immigrant communities in American cities, often run by families trying to build new lives in a different country. Their food was flavorful and unfamiliar to many Americans at the time. When the phrase Chinese restaurant syndrome entered public conversation, it unintentionally linked those restaurants with the idea of danger or contamination. And once that association formed, it was difficult to undo. Some historians later pointed out that the fear of MSG appeared during a period when Asian communities in the United States were still facing strong cultural stereotypes and prejudice. The result was a strange contradiction. Many American foods quietly contained glutamate, but the fear was directed mainly toward the cuisine of a specific culture. Over time, Chinese restaurants felt the pressure of this perception. Some began advertising no MSG signs in their windows, even if they had never used large amounts of the ingredient in the first place. The label became a way to reassure customers, but inside laboratories and research centers, scientists continued asking a different question. Was MSG actually dangerous? And the more carefully researchers studied the ingredient, the more complicated the answer seemed to become. As the debate about MSG continued through the 1970s and 1980s, scientists around the world began studying the ingredient more carefully. Researchers conducted controlled experiments, giving participants food with and without MSG, to see whether the symptoms described in the original reports would appear. In most cases, they didn't. The majority of participants could not reliably tell when MSG had been added to their food. And the dramatic reactions described in earlier stories were rarely reproduced under scientific conditions. This did not mean that every person reacted exactly the same way to every food. Some individuals reported mild sensitivity when consuming very large amounts of MSG on an empty stomach. But these reactions were uncommon and usually temporary. More importantly, the ingredient itself was not unique. Glutamate, the compound that gives MSG its flavor, already existed naturally in many foods people consumed every day. Parmesan cheese, tomatoes, mushrooms, seaweed, and many other ingredients contained natural glutamate. Even the human body produced it. By the late 20th century, major health organizations began reviewing the scientific evidence more systematically. The US Food and Drug Administration classified MSG as generally recognized as safe. International health organizations reached similar conclusions. When consumed in normal amounts as part of food, MSG was not considered harmful for the vast majority of people. Yet, despite these findings, the reputation of MSG had already been shaped by decades of public fear. Many food companies continued marketing products as MSG-free. Restaurants kept using the phrase to reassure customers, and for some people, the ingredient remained associated with suspicion. The story of MSG became a reminder of how public perception can be influenced not only by science, but also by headlines, rumors, and cultural assumptions. A short letter, a memorable phrase, and suddenly an ordinary ingredient became a national controversy. Today, more than a century after Kikuné Ikeda first identified the taste of umami, MSG is still widely used around the world. But the debate surrounding it tells a much larger story. It shows how easily fear can spread when a simple explanation meets a compelling narrative. And it raises a question worth remembering whenever a new food scare appears. Are we reacting to evidence, or to the story we have heard about it? If you enjoy uncovering the hidden histories behind everyday things, subscribe to the Paper Trail Archive. because sometimes the most surprising stories are not hidden in secret vaults or classified files. Sometimes they are hiding in something as simple as the food on our plate.